Okay, so now that we're recording, my name is Janina Abu Ali, and I'm a student at St. Peter's. This is my final semester at St. Peter's, and I graduate in, usually I say May, but because of everything, June now. So
Okay.
Bill, can you please state your full name and spell it out slowly?
Sure. Well, the full name is William Richard Armbruster, Arbruster. But
Today,
call me Bill. I don't use, I use, usually the only people who call me William are people in doctor's offices. And of course, when, I'm a retired journalist. I used William as my byline most of the time, but you know, my friends all know me as Bill, so use that.
thank you. Today is May 4th, 2021. The purpose of this meeting is to celebrate St. Peter's 150th anniversary by interviewing various students, alumni, and faculty members. So welcome, Bill. Thank you so much again for agreeing to do this. I'm so happy that we have an opportunity to talk about your time at St. Peter's. And to start, can you please tell me a little bit about your childhood and where you grew up before you came to St. Peter's?
Sure. Well, I was on the fourth of five boys. My poor mother. Actually, we were all good kids. I was born and raised in Bergenfield, New Jersey, Bergenfield in Bergen County, and went to Catholic elementary school and then to Regis High School, Regis, a Jesuit high school in New York. I was very fortunate to win a scholarship there. Regis is an elite Jesuit high school. It's considered the best Catholic high school in the country. And somehow I made it in, and even more amazingly, I survived, because back in those days, a lot of people flunked out, but somehow I scraped by. So I had a very happy childhood, and you know, my family was probably middle class. We didn't have a lot of money. We hardly ever went out to dinner. Didn't go away on vacations, but you know, we had a good life. We were comfortable. My three older brothers, George, class of 62, Bob, 63, and Joe, class of 67. As you can tell from the years I mentioned, they were all St. Peter's graduates. So, you know, and they had good experiences. Bob died, and he was injured in an motor vehicle accident. He was hit by a truck in September 2018 and lost consciousness immediately, and he died 2 days later. But he was editor of the Powwow, now, well, which would now be called the St. Peter's Tribune, and he was a German major, but he said his real major was the Powwow, and because that's where he devoted most of his time. And it was good preparation for him, because he spent his career as a journalist, mostly with the Star Ledger as a copy editor. Copy editors are people who check for spelling typos, and they also write headlines. But he also worked briefly for the Record in Bergen County, and the Catholic Advocate, which is the Newark Archdiocesan Catholic newspaper. So all three of them went to St. Peter's. George was an economics major, and he's a retired banker. Joe was a history major, and he was outstanding military cadet in ROTC all 4 years. And ROTC back then was compulsory for the first 2 years, and he really liked it. And then he served in Vietnam, and he sort of turned against the military then. He didn't become one of the anti-war protesters, which I was doing, and we can get into that a little later. So, and my younger brother, Jim, he did not go to St. Peter's. He went to Lemoyne. He had a full, another Jesuit school up in Syracuse. He had a full scholarship there. And, you know, we all had 8 years of Jesuit education, 8 years of 4 years of Jesuit high school, and then 4 years of Jesuit college. So that's family.
I'm really sorry to hear about your brother, Bill, but I'm sure he's very proud of you, as is all of your family.
Well, after he died, and I was very surprised, and this is a footnote, but he never married and didn't have any children, and he was one of the most generous people I have ever known, and I thought he would have left all his money to charity, but much to my amazement, to that of my brothers George, Joe, and Jim, Bob left 40% to charity, divided among 15 different charities, including St. Peter's, the Jesuit, Fordham Prep, the Jesuit high school he attended, mostly Catholic charities. But the other 60% divided among his surviving brothers. And I'm certainly not rich, but I felt I don't need it. And so I decided to establish a scholarship in Bob's memory. And because of his strong interest in social justice issues, I called it the Robert J. Armbruster Social Justice Scholarship. And the first student just received the award for this semester. It's a relatively small amount of money, but it's an endowed scholarship. And my surviving brothers and I also sued the company of the truck driver. We did not blame the driver, but you know, accidents happen, and I'm sure the driver, you know, he has said that he feels guilty. He has told the lawyers for his company that he feels guilty, but we sued the company and we won a very generous settlement. So I donated all of my proceeds from the lawsuit to the scholarship, and some other family members, including my son, some of my nieces and cousins, have also donated, and some other friends of mine and friends of Bob, classmates of his from St. Peter's. So you know, it's a nice tribute to Bob to have this scholarship named for him.
What a great way to honor your brother. And hopefully one day that student who received that scholarship will help it expand even more, so that even more students can benefit from this scholarship and learn about who your brother was and what things he did.
I hope so Linda Moore from the advancement office arranged for a Zoom interview with her a couple months ago, and very impressive young lady. She's a transfer student from Hudson Catholic Hudson County Community College, and she wants to become a lawyer like you and work. And she's a somewhat older woman. I think she's maybe in her 30s. She has a son who's 11, and she was abused by her spouse, and she wants to work on women's rights. So she's a junior now, so maybe in 2 years she'll be joining you in law school. And you know, I think that's very commendable ambition for her, and you know, what a legacy. So you know, when I spoke with her, I told her about Bob, and she was very impressed. So you know, that I feel really good about doing this, something worthwhile. So anyway, I know the next question is what brought you to St. Peter's, correct? And
Yes.
so it's very simple. I mean, I did not want to come to St. Peter's. After all my brothers had gone there. Um, and I applied to some other schools, got accepted to various other schools, but financially, given my family's circumstances, it was impossible. I needed to basically commute, and St. Peter's gave me a partial scholarship, and with what my father gave me and some of my earnings, I could support it. And tuition then was much, much, much lower, a tiny fraction, even adjusted for inflation, than it is these days. But that's why I came to St. Peter's. But uh, I had a fantastic experience there, and I'm very glad that I did, and something that maybe we can get into later. And I have friends who have gone to probably all of the Ivy League schools, as well as places like Stanford, Duke, and MIT. But I have a closer relationship with St. Peter's and have gotten more out of it in my retirement years than anyone else I know has gotten out of his or her school. Now, of course, it helps, but I live just a 10-minute walk from St. Peter's, and therefore, one of the things I've been on campus a lot, and we can talk about that more later. But in the last 10 years, and I've met a lot of students, and it's extremely rewarding to interact with young people like you and so many other students. And I like to boast that I probably have more Facebook friends who are at least 40 years younger than me than anyone else I know. Uh, and that's, so many of the students I've met, I've become Facebook friends with. And just one aside, I'm co-chair of the class of 71 50th reunion committee, and we're holding our reunion in September. And so we have a special Facebook page for the class of 71, and there's a woman who's a doctoral candidate in education who wanted to join the page, and I happened to see the notice about it, and my co-chair from the committee said, "No, you can't be a member." And I could tell from her name, and it was an Iranian or Indian sounding name. And so I was quite sure that she had not been part of our class. But I looked her up on Facebook, and I saw she had posted on Facebook. She was explaining that she was a doctoral candidate in education at St. Peter's. Oh, and I told you about this woman. And she wanted to interview current students or recent graduates about the financial challenges of paying for college. So I then contacted a number of students and recent graduates and asked them to contact her. And she so far has interviewed, I think, 5 people, 3 women and 2 guys. So, and hopefully a couple more will respond, including maybe you or some of the other students from the Muslim Students Association. But I was just happy to help her, and I'm fortunate that I have good relationships with a lot of students and recent alumni. People I've audited classes at St. Peter's, and sat in class with some fabulous students, and Lawrence Squillanti 3 times, and in different classes, and gone on 8 trips led by St. Peter's faculty members. And so I've met a lot of students that way, and that intergenerational dynamic, I think, is very interesting, and it's been very rewarding to me, and I've enjoyed it, and hopefully I've acquired a little bit of wisdom over the years, and can share some. And you know, I've tried to offer advice to students on different things like majors or you know career advice, and particularly some who are interested in journalism. I worked as a print journalist all my career, and print journalism, as you probably know, is in a sad state of decline. Although I'm very gratified to see at least that some of the major publications like the New York Times and the Washington Post are doing quite well. Of course, the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, the richest man in the world, and it certainly helps to have a billionaire as your owner. But you know, I try to encourage students where I can and give them some tips about different opportunities that there might be, and you know, certainly for online publications.
Thank you, Bill. Oh, so I actually did reach out to that woman you told me about, and she actually said that she just wants alumni for her
Oh, okay.
research. So I wasn't able to help her, but I did pass it along, and hopefully people responded. But I actually want to ask you a question about that. How did you know that she wasn't part of your class by looking at her name?
Well, I also checked the yearbook, but you know, I was pretty sure that you know, obviously for my class there were 700 people or so, and I didn't know that many. And my best friends from St. Peter's were actually from the class of 70 rather than the class of 71. But I checked the yearbook. Our photo wasn't in the yearbook, and in the back there was a section of people whose names were whose pictures were not included. Her name was not listed there, so I was almost certain. But she explained that she you know just wanted a way of reaching out to people, so that's why. And you know, our student body then was far less diverse than it is today, and you know, the vast majority of the students were white, Irish, Italian, Polish, um, and there were only a handful of minority students. There were a couple of African students, and you know, some of the basketball players were, you know, a lot of blacks on the basketball team. It was only in my sophomore year that St. Peter's started something that was initially called Project 25, where they admitted 25 Black students. But there were a few in my year, and actually two of my best friends from my year were both Black students. One, Mike Greer, Grier, and he was had attended Weequahic High School, Weequahic in Newark, and I think he had been president of the student government there, and he was an urban studies major, and we're still in touch. And also Alvin Shiggs, Shiggs, who had served in Vietnam before coming to St. Peter's, so he was several years older than the rest of us. But we were all urban studies majors, but I can get into that a little bit more. But you know, so there weren't many Black students, but two of my best friends from my class and two of the people from my class with whom I stay in closest touch were Black students. But you know, and so there, I don't think there may have been one or two with Muslim names, but you know, that woman, you know, I was pretty sure that she was not in our class when I checked. But I looked up, she had posted her essay on her own Facebook page, but I realized that she was probably not going to get much response that way. So I immediately emailed her and said, look, I'll help. I'll contact some students and recent alumni that I know. And so I'm delighted to have been able to help.
So with Project 25, were there 25 students admitted in the whole of St. Peter's or just your class?
Well,
Yeah.
they were admitted as part of the class of 72.
Okay.
So it was my sophomore year, 68, but they came.
Mhm.
Uh, so that, and then that evolved into the EOF program. And, obviously St. Peter's now is a majority school. And, I really enjoy the diversity of St. Peter's today. I think it's much more interesting. Can you hang on just 1 second?
Yes.
Hey, Jim, can I call you back in about an hour or so? I'm on a Zoom session right now.
Well, no.
My younger brother calling, who you may have heard him say he'll be in his piano lesson. I give him great credit. They got, he and his wife got a piano for their daughters. I think only one of their two daughters played the piano, but Jim, in his retirement, he has been taking piano lessons. And so I keep asking him, when are you going to be making your debut at Carnegie Hall? I want to be there.
That's great. I don't think I would ever be brave enough to try the piano.
I'm not either.
Yeah. So can you tell me more about your urban studies major? Is that the only thing you majored in? Did you have a minor? And why did you choose urban studies out of everything?
Well, actually, I like to tell people that I majored in troublemaking at St. Peter's, although I would say trouble in the sense of that John Lewis spoke about good trouble. But I mean that's a joke when I say troublemaking. But I was very active and student up there.
Sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you again. I don't know.
That thing might have slipped again.
Mhm.
Okay, I tried adjusting it again. So, well, I had a convoluted history of majors at St. Peter's. I started as a sociology major, and then in the spring of my freshman year, 1968, St. Peter's announced that it would be starting an urban studies major. So I switched into urban studies because this was, after all, the year after the Newark riots, which were very much on the minds of, everyone in Newark and Jersey City. And, Jersey City had big riots, I think, the summer of '65. And as a liberal do-gooder, even then, which I still am, I thought this was very appealing. But technically, what's listed on my transcript, because I changed majors again, is economics. And why I switched into economics, I have no idea. But at the beginning of my senior year, I went to see the academic dean, Father Paul Becker, Becker, and I said, can you just call me a social science major? Because I have all these credits in urban studies, sociology, economics, and political science. And I have plenty of credits between the four of those areas. Can you call me a social science major? And he did. And so for years on my resume, I always listed economics or social science as my major. But one time around 1990, I was applying for some journalism fellowships, and they requested a transcript from your undergraduate college as well as any graduate school you attended. And I saw it listed my major as economics. So that's why I now say officially it was economics, but I only had 15 credits in economics. But I feel that the preparation I got from all those diverse areas prepared me well for a career in journalism. So that was my major. But the people with whom I identify most closely were the other people in urban studies. And we had 2 years ago, in the fall of 2019, a mini reunion of about 8 people who were in urban studies, including Mike Greer, Alvin Shiggs, the 2 guys I mentioned before, as well as Mike Greer's ex-wife, Brenda Greer, who was in that Project 25 group from the class of 72, but she knew all the people. And Mike said, well, we should invite Brenda. So sure, fine with me. So we had that reunion in the fall of 72. We met a couple of current students and got a tour of the campus and had a great time. And all of those people are planning to come to our class of 71 full reunion in September, which we'll be doing in conjunction with the class of 70. So that was my major. No simple lesson there. And then I think you are on the list of prepared questions. Tell me about a professor that left an indelible impression on you. Well, there are so many, but perhaps the one that I will single out is the late Henry Bischoff, Bischoff. He was a Jesuit at the time, and he served as director of the Urban Studies program. And St. Peter's was either the first or second college in the US to set up an undergraduate program in urban studies. And Henry was just a visionary, and he had left so many impressions on so many people, and he was very beloved by students, particularly in their urban studies program. And and this is an aside, or let me mention, one of my classmates, for the reunion committee, I volunteered to contact people who were urban studies majors, as well as other people that I knew. And so there was a woman with a mailing address in Australia, but no email address. And I figured, it listed her married name, and I didn't recognize that. So I asked Linda Moore from the advancement office, do you have her maiden name? And her maiden name, and then I recognized that, and I checked the yearbook, and I saw, yes, urban studies major. So I vaguely remembered her. So I decided to send her a letter via snail mail. And this was about a month ago. And I included my email address, and I said, Peggy, how are you? And I'd love to hear from you. Hope you remember me. And telling her about the reunion. And I said, I realize it's a really long way to come from Australia for the reunion. But the letter finally arrived a few days ago. So she sent me a long email on Sunday saying, so good to hear from you and remembering me. And she specifically mentioned in her email Henry Bischoff and how he took her out to dinner before she left for Australia in 1974. And she's been living there ever since, 47 years. But that was, Henry had left St. Peter's by then. But you've heard the phrase cura personalis. I don't recall hearing it when I was a student at St. Peter's, but the care for the whole person. And Henry epitomized that, and reaching out to this student before she moved to Australia. She had married some guy. I guess, sadly, she's divorced now, but she's got 2 kids and 6 grandchildren living in Australia. And she said that she thinks her education at St. Peter's influenced not only her and the career choices she made, and she became a teacher and then a principal and a deputy superintendent in Australia. And she retired a year ago, and now she's teaching at a university there, teaching teacher education. But it was very striking to me that she specifically mentioned Henry Bischoff. But while I would single him out as having the most profound influence on me, I probably had an even more profound influence on his life, because I have perhaps a unique accomplishment. I do not know of anyone else who has done this. Ramapo College, which is based up in Mahwah, it opened in the fall of 1971. And in the spring of 1970, my brother Bob was then working as a reporter for the Record. He mentioned, Bill, there's a new state college that's going to be opening in Bergen County. Maybe you should write to the president and tell him about your activities at St. Peter's, everything you're involved with, and suggest that maybe they might like to have somebody, a student giving a perspective in planning this new college. And he said, and you could probably get paid under federal work study, which was very generous then. So I wrote to the president, and much to my pleasant surprise, I got a letter back from the president's right-hand man saying, could you come in for an interview? So it was just about 6 or 7 people working in an office building in Hackensack right that summer, June of 1970 I started. And I got the job, originally planning to work just for that summer, but I enjoyed it immensely. I was only 12 credits short of the total I needed for graduation, and I figured I could do that with a senior thesis and some independent study. And then I went to Father Becker and said, hey, could you just call me a social science major? I'm working at Ramapo. I really enjoy it. And then Ramapo paid me a pittance, minimum wage, whatever. But I continued working there all the way through my senior year, as well as into the following summer. But about one of the reasons why Ramapo was interested in hiring me, and at that time the name Ramapo had not even been decided on, it was just the State College of North Jersey, and as a placeholder name, and was because I listed on my resume having been an urban studies major. So my first week there, they said, is there somebody at St. Peter's that we could talk to about urban studies, and get their ideas to help us, because we want that to be a component of our program? And I said, sure, Henry Bischoff, and he's a friend of mine. And they said, well, could you call and arrange an appointment for us so we could come and see them? So the president's right-hand man, so I called Henry, set up the appointment. The next week we went down, the president's right-hand man and I and one other person, and met with Henry, and he talked about urban studies and offered some suggestions. And the president's right-hand man was so impressed with Henry that he recommended to the president, we ought to hire this man. And so they made him an offer, and Henry was interested in leaving the Jesuits. He had, made that decision in his personal life. And there had been a student strike at St. Peter's in May of 1969, which I can talk to you about a little more later. So Henry was receptive to the idea, and he just wanted to go back to teaching, but instead they offered to make him a dean. So he became dean of what was then called the School of Human Environment. Ramapo did not have any regular academic departments. Instead, everything was going to be organized in interdisciplinary schools, and human environment would be basically social sciences, urban studies. So Henry was offered a job, so he came to Ramapo. Then the following summer, late June, early July, more staff started coming on board, including a young woman who was hired to work as a guidance counselor. She was just in her mid-20s, and by this time, well, long since, so in late summer of 1970, we had moved to an office building on Route 17, and she was sitting at the desk right behind me, and I told her, well, there's this guy, Henry Bischoff, who will be one of the deans here. He's a friend of mine, very interesting. I'm sure you'll enjoy meeting him. And she said, oh, yeah, sure, I'd like to meet him. So a week or two later, Henry walks in, and I happened to be there, and I said, Henry, this is Pam. Pam, this is Henry. Little did I know that they would start dating, and a couple of years later, they got married and had 2 kids. And Pam went on to become eventually the VP of Student Life at Ramapo. So she had and Henry went back after a couple of years as dean. He went back to teaching, and he was the one who spent more of his time raising their 2 daughters than Pam did. But well, don't tell her that. But but it's true, she was working full time. Henry was faculty teaching maybe 3 days a week, and so he was around to take care of the kids. So I had a profound influence on his life, and I'm still in touch with Pam. She's a good friend. So it's strange the way these things work. So that's one professor who had a profound influence on me, and me even more on him in his life.
That's great. You should have majored in matchmaking.
Possibly, yes.
So I also want to ask you about the extracurricular activities you participated in while you were at St. Peter's, and you talked a lot about your activism and some of the work you did on campus. And I wonder if some of that was influenced by the extracurriculars that you were a member of.
Yeah, well, I had worked on my high school paper at Regis, but I wasn't made editor. So I said, the hell with this. I never worked on the powwow as a student at St. Peter's, but my first day of freshman orientation, the small group leader was a sophomore who had spent the summer in Appalachia. St. Peter's then had a program where 8 or 10 students would go down with usually 2 Jesuits to work in, of all things, teaching Bible study, and also a recreation program for the kids. But it was a way of connecting the St. Peter's students with the people in this very poor area in Martin County, Kentucky. And this student spoke so effusively about the program, I immediately decided this is something I want to apply for. So I did, and I fortunately was accepted. So I went down to Appalachia with 6 other students all from the class of 70, who are still my very close friends, and 2 Jesuits. One of the Jesuits died, another is still alive. He's very close. So the Appalachia program, and I went down also Christmas of 1967 with the group that had been there the summer of 67, and then as well as again Christmas of 68. So the Appalachia program wasn't technically an extracurricular activity, but I consider it, in terms of my identification with St. Peter's, that's probably my closest identification. But I was in the honors program. I served on the student, and I ran for student senate as a senator as a freshman, and I lost, but so that was the end of my career in electoral politics. But I was a student representative on several faculty committees, including a committee on teacher evaluation during my sophomore year, in junior year, I became president of Kappa Alpha Alpha, the Student Honor Society. And I really wanted to turn that into an experimental college within St. Peter's. And, I came up with ideas for courses in things like mass media and social change and science fiction as literature. And, that was part of my activism, but the honors program activities. And St. Peter's then did not have any dorms, but fortunately, it had an honors house located at 47 Glenwood, exactly where the student center is today. And it was an old house, and the first floor was seminar rooms, but there were 6 or 8 guys who lived there. Unfortunately, no women, but mostly considered like an extra scholarship for people in the honors program. And a couple of foreign students. And my roommate I lived there during my sophomore and junior year. My roommate was a student originally from Sierra Leone. And we're still friends, hoping to see him. He lives in Maryland now, but he's planning to come back for the reunion in September. So I hope to see him then. And that was great. And also, it's technically not an extracurricular, but I served on a student senate lecture committee, and so we got starting in my freshman year, we had people like Philip Berrigan, a radical priest, and he was the brother of, I forget which order he was in, but he was the brother of Daniel Berrigan, who's a very close friend of Dr. Brown. Daniel Berrigan would be 100 today.
I think she's mentioned him before.
Yeah, he was like a mentor to her. But we got Philip Berrigan, and I remember we had in my sophomore year people like Dick Gregory, and in the 69 yearbook, there's a photo of Mike Greer, the aforementioned Mike Greer, and myself with Dick Gregory, the famous black comedian who ran as an independent for president in 1968. And Dick Gregory, and myself, Mike Greer, and one female black student whose name I don't remember, but that's one of the, I'm proud of that. But yeah, we also had people like Ralph Nader, Julian Bond, Howard Zinn. Dr. Brown certainly knows him. You may have heard of him. He did an alternate history, or one of his famous books was A People's History of the United States, which gives a very conflicting view of what people look on. So the lecture program was quite interesting. And but one other activity in my freshman year, a man named Frank Mertz, M-E-R-T-Z, who was then vice president for development at St. Peter's. He was class of 58, so not that much older than us. But his best friend was a guy named Jim Bausch, B-A-U-S-C-H, who had been in the first group, and his classmate at St. Peter's, who had gone to graduate school at Emory University in Atlanta, and then went into the first group of Peace Corps volunteers in 1961, and to what was then East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. And together, they established an internship program for St. Peter's students, where in my first 2 years at St. Peter's, we had a trimester system where students could go down, work at the Peace Corps headquarters, get academic credit, get paid on their federal work study. And it was a fantastic program. And I heard about that to 2 guys who were then juniors, they were two years ahead of me. they went down, and so I was a freshman, they were juniors, and I immediately decided that's something I wanted to do. So I did that the third trimester of my junior year and stayed there for the summer. No, third trimester of sophomore year, and then the summer afterwards. So that Peace Corps experience, that was really significant. It opened my eyes to the world, and just as the Appalachia program had exposed me to a different segment of American society, working for Peace Corps, I mean, living in Washington was great. We had a small apartment, and I shared with one other guy. Actually, then there was a second guy, so there were three of us for the summer. And I was assisting the desk officers for Libya, Tunisia, and Afghanistan. And I remember meeting about 100 Libyans who were coming. Peace Corps volunteers were going to be trained in Arizona, but there were Libyan English teachers who came to Washington in the summer of 1969 to teach English, to teach Arabic to the American Peace Corps volunteers who could practice teaching English to them. And they spent a few days in Washington and meeting these guys. And sadly, the Gaddafi's revolution took place in September of 1969. So those people who were training as Peace Corps volunteers to go to Libya, they never had the chance to go. But it was a fascinating program. And so it was after that I changed my major to economics, and precisely why. If I had changed it to political science, that would have been more logical, but it wasn't. But I just did start taking a lot of political science classes. And so that wasn't an extracurricular. But as a result of being in Washington for the Peace Corps internship, I missed out on the student strike in 1969, which may be very fortunate because, well, certainly I would have supported the strike. I would have been one of the students striking, but it was, there were 42 students and 10 faculty members, including 2 Jesuits, who were arrested for sitting in the office of the executive vice president, a Jesuit named Father Ryan, R-Y-A-N. And I do not know if I would have been one of the students arrested, whether I would have had the courage to stay there and be arrested, but it would have caused a rupture with my family. And so it's fortunate that I missed the strike.
Why were they striking, and why would it have created a rupture with your family?
Well, I mean, my parents would have been really ticked off at me for getting arrested. And this was the time when the anti-war movement was raging. But the strike was because 2 radical professors were being denied. Well, one of them was being denied tenure. One of them, a man named Tom Hessler, Haessler. He was a lay professor of theology, but he didn't even have a master's degree, and let alone a doctorate. So these days it would be inconceivable for him to even be considered for tenure. But he profoundly moved a lot of students. He was extremely popular. The other was a political science professor who had real psychological problems. He was, I think crazy, and probably most people knew him, but he was very popular too because he had been denouncing the administration and the ROTC and denouncing the war. And the administration simply had decided to fire him. So that was the issue of the strike. And it's sad. I mean, it created a lot of bad feelings within the college. the faculty was torn apart. A lot of the faculty supported the strike, and similarly, a lot of them opposed it, and there were deep divisions within the student body too. And it's very unfortunate that it happened. In retrospect, I think the administration could have avoided it if they had at least offered the Tom Hessler an opportunity. Look, go and finish your master's degree, at least take a year's sabbatical, finish your master's degree, and then if you get that, then you could be considered for tenure. And I think the administration mishandled it. So it's a sad chapter in St. Peter's history, and I'm sure that a lot of people from my era still have bad feelings towards St. Peter's. And if I had been there and been one of the students arrested, I might have been one of those people who had bad feelings, but I didn't have that experience. So I came back from my Peace Corps internship in '69. I became president of Kappa Alpha Alpha, and was trying to make the honors program an experimental school within the college. So, and I served on the faculty Senate Honors Program Committee, and the chairman of the program was a nice guy, an English professor, but he was a very weak leader. So in a way, I was sort of directing the honors program, which was crazy. But anyway, so those were my extracurriculars, as well as participating in lots of demonstrations. Certainly, I know you ask about, the social movements of the time. Well, I remember in the spring of '68 participating in a walk in Newark, in solidarity with the Black community there. And the first anti-war protest of any kind at St. Peter's was, I think, in the spring of '68. This political science professor in what was McDermott Lounge. And if you look at the yearbooks, like from '68, '69, you'll see some really interesting photos. And then in the fall of '68, Richard Nixon came to campus 10 days before the election, and I'm proud that I was one of the students demonstrating against Nixon, who campaigned that I have a secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. And of course, I shouted out as he made that statement in Deneen Auditorium, now Roy Irving Theater, what's your plan? And Mike Greer was standing in front, and he was holding a protest sign against Nixon, and the Secret Service was there. And Mike was then taken by this, I guess the Secret Service signaled the Jersey City cops, and Mike was taken down. There was a police precinct right on Montgomery Avenue, and Mike was taken there. And to their credit, Frank Mertz, the vice president for development, he came and got Mike out of jail. But and Mike says that he was followed, or his name remained on a list, but the Secret Service maintained of people who were potential threats. And Mike, there's no doubt in Mike's mind or my mind that he was singled out because he was Black. Most of the students protesting there were whites. I wore a coat and tie that day for some strange reason, because I thought, I don't want them to think that all these student protesters are long-haired hippies wearing blue jeans. So I wore a coat and tie to the demonstration. But and then in the October of 1969, there was a big demonstration in Journal Square against the war. And in November of 1969, I went down to Washington for a big demonstration along with some other St. Peter's students for something called the Mobilization to End the War in Vietnam. And you probably have heard of the killings of 4 students at Kent State on May 4th, 1970, so exactly 51 years ago today. And, I still remember that very vividly. And there was a big protest demonstration in Washington the following Saturday. And I went down with 2 other St. Peter's students. And I'm sure there were plenty of St. Peter's students who went down for that demonstration. And I continued active in the anti-war movement, even in graduate school. But, so in a way, my 3 years on campus, because of my senior year, I was working at Ramapo and living with my parents in Bergenfield, framed in a way by the March on the Pentagon in 1967, even though I did not participate in it. And then in 1970, the demonstration in Washington against the war, and concerns about the draft were very prominent for students, and particularly guys. Women were not subject to the draft. And in the fall of 1969, for the first time, and college students were exempt from the draft. So we were lucky. And frankly, it was what was called skin privilege. A lot of middle-class white kids went to college and got deferments, whereas Black and Latino kids, many fewer of them went to college, and so they served in Vietnam in disproportionate numbers. And I lost my train of thought there, but the protests against the war were seminal. Oh, and so in September of 1969, or the fall of 69, there was a lottery, and my number was 36, and I thought, oh my God, I don't want to go into the Army. I don't want to go to Canada. I don't want to go to prison. So what are my options? I talked to a young professor who was a draft counselor, and he said, well, do you have any medical issues that might keep you out? And I said, yes, I had asthma as a child, which had kept me out of compulsory ROTC. I guess we had to do get some kind of physical. Our doctor signing a form, and I told my doctor what the summer before, right before the start of my freshman year, I don't want to be in ROTC. And he said, well, I'll say you have asthma and you're not qualified for it. So I got out of that. And then I saw him again, and he wrote a letter to my draft board, and he kept me out. And to this day, I still revere him for doing that. So I did not have to worry about the draft, but a lot of my classmates either were drafted or enlisted, and some were in ROTC, went over and served as commissioned officers.
Why were you placed in the lottery even though you were a college student? I thought college students were exempt.
Well, this would be for after you graduated, so that I would have been subject to the draft. Prior to that, graduate students were exempt. So there were an awful lot of people who graduated like in 67, 68, 69, who went to graduate school because it would exempt them from keep their exemptions. But for those graduating in 1970 or 71 or 72, there would be no automatic exemption from the draft just because you were in graduate school. So,
can you explain more about what ROTC was?
Sure. Well, it stands for Reserve Officers Training Corps, CORPS, and and I think it's a good program. I did not object to it like a lot of people objected to it even being voluntary. I objected to it being compulsory.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you again.
Let me try to adjust the setting. Yeah, it's gone back. I'm talking to an Apple technician tomorrow, and that's one of the things I will ask her about. So is it better now?
Yes, you're back now.
Okay. So that was ROTC, and all the guys had to do it. All the women, at least, and compulsory ROTC was eliminated for those who entered in the fall of '69. But for women, and women were first admitted to the day school in '66. So for women who were admitted in '66, '67, '68 had to take gym. And one of my classmates, a good friend of mine, and we have a Facebook page for the class of '71, and she's very conservative, and she said, I was upset that women were not allowed into ROTC, and whereas so many guys objected to having to participate. But so they had drills every Wednesday down at Lincoln Park, and they had classes. And one of the questions on our Facebook page for the class of '71 was, which professor had a great influence on you. And some people listed professors who taught military science, which I thought was interesting. And so some of those people were really good teachers, apparently.
So ROTC was like a military training program, and was it at every university or just St. Peter's?
Well, it was at many different universities. The Army used it as a way of recruiting potential future officers, those who did not go to West Point or those who went into officer candidate school. So, it's a good program. And ironically, my son, who's very liberal, he makes me look, well, I consider myself quite liberal, but he would dismiss me as a moderate. He was a Bernie supporter during the presidential campaign last year, or during the primary campaign. But he went enlisted in the Army, went to OCS. He's now a major in the Army. He's on active duty over in Qatar, and he did 2 tours in Afghanistan. So I think it's good for the Army to have people who get a liberal arts education. The Army is overwhelmingly tends to be populated by more conservative people. Although my son, who's in military intelligence, he has told me that at least among the officers in military intelligence, there are a lot of liberals, which is good.
I also want to talk about what the environment was like on campus when people were protesting the war. Was it very divided within the student body, or do you think most of the student body was supportive of the anti-war movement? And what was the reaction of the university like?
Well, I mean, the university tolerated the protests. None of them were violent. It's just when people sat in during the strike in 1969 that there was, and again, there was no violence. There was no looting, no burning, unlike happened at some other campuses. And there were some counter protesters. I'm sure there were. I mean, my recollection of the people in the auditorium demonstrating against Nixon is that overwhelmingly, the students at least, were anti-Nixon. According to an article I read not too long ago, it was either in the Powwow or maybe the Jersey Journal, that the article said it was mixed. Hang on a second, I think somebody was knocking at my door.
The recording, so we could continue right now.
Okay. So, I'm sure there were pro-war students. I think in 1967, maybe in the spring of 1967, there was a pro-war demonstration at St. Peter's. But the mood in the country was changing, and by 1968, the anti-war sentiment was gaining steam, particularly among young people.
I also wanted to ask you about more local demonstrations and what was happening around. Like you mentioned Newark and Jersey City. What was that like? What was the environment like? And were students involved in demonstrations of support or anything when it came to what was happening with the rebellions in Newark? And then I didn't even know about Jersey City, but maybe you could tell me more about that.
Well, I really don't know too much about the protests in Jersey City. You know, I presume it was triggered, sadly, by events that we see all too often happening even today. Probably, you know, arrests of young Black people for whatever, you know, in some cases perhaps justified, in other cases not, you know, driving while Black or breathing while Black. But you know, there was a lot of money. President Johnson, he had started the Great Society. There was a lot of money for different programs, model cities, and a lot of my classmates, particularly in urban studies, got jobs, summer jobs, and then some went on to work like for the Jersey City Housing Authority or different programs, maybe as social workers or whatever. A lot of people from the urban studies program did that, and some went on to graduate school and became urban planners. One of my classmates who was an urban studies major got his doctorate in urban planning, and then he was a White House fellow as a young man in his late 20s and ended up staying in Washington and became a political consultant. He worked in Bill Clinton's White House as director of congressional relations, and he's a good friend. He came to the mini urban studies reunion a few years, 2 years ago. So, but yeah, a lot of people worked in different programs, and I wasn't as active maybe as some others in the community. I was focused more on just on events at St. Peter's and trying to change St. Peter's.
And within St. Peter's, was there a lot of effort to promote racial justice led by the students coming towards the sort of, if they were influenced by the civil rights movement and what was happening in other parts of the country?
You know, there were different programs, and as I mentioned, this Project 25 had started, and some of the Jesuits were very liberal. One of the two Jesuit priests who were arrested in the strike, Father Ed McGlinchey, MC, capital Glinchy. He was a philosophy professor, and he was moderator of something called the Lafarge Society, capital LA, capital FARGE. And I was part of that for a while. I don't recall precisely what we did, but it was concerned with social justice issues. And Father Frank Keating, Keating, who became a hero, you know, probably the most popular Jesuit, at least, along with Henry Bischoff while he was still a Jesuit. But Frank Keating, I remember the spring of my freshman year, 1968, taking an honors program seminar called Theology of the City. And I was the only freshman in the class. There was a couple of sophomores, some juniors, seniors. Dr. Doria, Joe Doria, the dean of the School of Education, he was a senior 3 years ahead of me. He was in that class, and that was a really high-powered class. And I was this lowly freshman, but Father Keating, he was open, and you know, we read books like The Secular City by Harvey Cox, and we met in a seminar room at the Honors House, and you know, just being in that class with that group of people was really significant. But in terms of trying to change the policies of St. Peter's, I think Mike Greer told me, if you're looking to interview someone else, I can give you Mike's contact information. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk to you. He's still living in Newark, although we fully expected him to become a big time politician. And I remember Father Keating's funeral in the 1990s. The funeral was at the St. Peter's Prep Parish Church downtown. And one woman who had been an urban studies major, she had been very close to Father Keating. She was living in Florida. She flew up for it, and I'll never forget her telling me to the cab driver driving her in from Newark Airport that day, "Is Mike Greer the mayor of Newark?" Because that was the expectation. And Mike didn't go into he was on the fringes of politics, but I know he mentioned to me that he had told Father Yanatelli, "Look, you've got to start getting some more Black students," and Mike might take credit in part for Project 25 being created and then ultimately expanded. But I think that's a junk call. But a lot of the Jesuits, Father Yanatelli was the president, and a truly great man. And he and I think Father Ryan, even though he was the bad guy in the strike, and Frank Mertz, the VP of development, and a lot of the Jesuits were very liberal. Some of the Jesuits were conservative, didn't like the protest, and you've probably heard that there was some resistance among faculty and male students when women were admitted to the day school in 1966, and some nasty remarks. By the time I started in 67, I think it was totally accepted, and the women I knew, I've asked, "Did you encounter any hostility?" And they said no, they did not. But it was a little tough in 66. And in fact, there were some guys who got buttons saying, "This is a man's school." And in 1966, 5 years ago, in 2016, there was and it was one of my friends from the Appalachia group, Anne Marie Nazaro, who was co-chair of the Class of 70 reunion committee, Nazaro, Nazzaro, who said to me in the fall of 2015, she said, "Do they know about the class that next year is the 50th anniversary of women entering the day school, and are they going to have any big events to commemorate it?" And I said, "I don't know." And she was my guest at a reception. I'm a member of the Board of Regents, and it was a program called the Regents Business Day or something like that. So I had invited Anne-Marie, and I said, "No, but why don't you suggest it to the president? He's standing right over here." So I introduced her to Dr. Cornacchia, who said, "That's a great idea. Excuse me, I want to go find our alumni director and mention it to her right now before I forget." So in the fall of 2016, they had this program celebrating the 50th anniversary of women being admitted to the day school. And, there were 100 freshmen, and, these women were outstanding. And as Anne Marie has said, Yeah, we were all either valedictorian or salutatorian in our high school. And I said, Amory, there were 3 women from your high school who came to St. Peter's. Not all of you were valedictorian or salutatorian. One of them had to be number 3 in the class. And there were some women who transferred, who had been in the evening division, who transferred into the day school as well.
Hey, thank you. So obviously you had a lot of experiences when you were an undergrad. And I'm just wondering, maybe you could speak about what you did after graduation and how a Jesuit education impacted that, if it impacted it at all.
Well, sure. I was extremely fortunate, Janine. As president of Kappa Alpha Alpha, the Student Honor Society, we had a budget for publications, which were delivered to the Honors House at 47 Glenwood. And one time in the dean's office, I had seen a publication called The Chronicle of Higher Education, which is sort of like the trade publication for higher education professionals. And I said, this looks interesting. Maybe I can use the honors program budget to get a subscription to this. And we also got the New York Times and the Atlantic and the New Yorker. And so we got the Chronicle of Higher Education. And one time I saw an article in there about a place called the East-West Center in Hawaii. And I had been interested in doing my junior year abroad, but I never really pursued it because financially it was not possible. And I thought, well, you know, if I can't do junior year abroad or study abroad, going to Hawaii would be pretty close. And I thought, maybe I should apply to this place. So I applied for to the East-West Center for a master's in Asian studies. And one of the people at St. Peter's who profoundly influenced me, even though I never had him in class, Dr. Angelo Danesino, Danesino. He was chair of the psychology department, and I went to see him at the start of my senior year. I was, thinking of applying for graduate programs in international relations, and I mentioned the East-West Center, and he said, well, Father McGinley used to be on the board of governors there. And Father McGinley was a Jesuit who was on sabbatical living with the Jesuit community at St. Peter's. He was a former president of Fordham University, and I guess either President Kennedy or President Johnson had appointed him to the board of governors. And Dr. Danesino said, why don't you go see Father McGinley, see if he will write a letter of recommendation for you. And I did. And I'm sure Father McGinley was kind enough to write a letter for me. And as a result, I received a very generous scholarship from the East-West Center. I got other recommendations, but I'm sure the one from Father McGinley had a major influence. The East-West Center is a federally funded think tank, research and educational institution. It provided grants for people to go for their master's degrees, or in some cases doctorates, and for students from the Pacific Islands, like Tonga and Samoa, to get, some of them went for undergraduate degrees at the University of Hawaii. So I got a master's degree in Asian studies from the University of Hawaii. And this grant was so generous. It even covered my airfare out to Hawaii, free room in the East-West Center dorm. Of course, full tuition, a book allowance. I did 5 months of Chinese language study in Taiwan. So I got that grant from the East-West Center and got my master's degree in Asian studies. And I mentioned to you, I had been interested in journalism. I never worked on the powwow. The East-West Center had a student magazine, and I started writing for that. And I met a couple of people who were journalists who were on leave. One was a Washington Post correspondent. He had been their bureau chief. in New Delhi and Tokyo. He had traveled all over Asia. He was writing a book at the time. And I thought, gee, this is really interesting. This sounds like a more interesting life than being a professor. And I assumed I'd probably be a professor of some kind. And another was an editorial writer for one of Japan's largest newspapers. He was director of the East-West Center's Communications Institute. So I began thinking more about journalism. And after getting my degree, well, I went back and worked at Ramapo for another academic year, primarily just to save money. I met the president. I came home Christmas of '72, surprised my parents, flew back from Taiwan, just showed up at my parents' front door and said, "Surprise, I'm home." And in early January of '73, I visited the president and I said, you know, I want to go back to Taiwan because I'm thinking of doing a PhD in Chinese history or political science, and it would behoove me to improve my Chinese language skills. So he said, sure, we'll take you on. You know, and I was planning just to stay for a semester so I could pay for my airfare, but I was enjoying it. So I ended up spending 2 semesters, and in the spring semester of '74, I taught a course, the only college teaching I've ever done on contemporary China. But I went back to Taiwan and lived there from mid '74 to the end of '76. And I tried hooking up with different publications. The guy from the Washington Post, he introduced me to the Washington Post Tokyo correspondent, but nothing worked out for me until I met a guy who was a former New York Times stringer in Taiwan and former Time magazine staffer in Hong Kong. And this man, he saw himself as a mentor to aspiring China scholars, as well as young people interested in journalism, but focused on Asia. And he said, well, let me introduce you to some of my friends. So I met him first in Hong Kong, and then a month or 2 later, he was in Taiwan in the summer of '75. And there were some interesting developments. Taiwan was under martial law right then, and had been for many, many years. And he said, well, why don't you write it up? I'll take it back to Hong Kong with me and see if I can get you picked up as a Taiwan stringer. So I then became the Taiwan stringer for a publication called the Far Eastern Economic Review, which was a very prestigious news weekly of business and politics in Asia. Sadly, it no longer exists. And also the Taiwan stringer for the Christian Science Monitor. He knew the Christian Science Monitor bureau chief in Hong Kong. So because of him, I got my start in journalism. And that's what I did after graduation. And then when I was in Taiwan, I met a beautiful young lady, and she was coming to the States to go for her master's degree. And I decided in late '76, well, I'll come back. And so I came back, and we ended up getting married 2 years later. Sadly, the marriage did not last, but we got a beautiful son out of it. But and then I spent most of my career working for a publication called the Journal of Commerce, which used to be a daily business newspaper established in 1827. In 2000, it became a weekly magazine. And I worked there for almost 30 years, but in the last 5 years, well, in 2000, it became a weekly magazine, but in early 2004, it became, I became editor of an even smaller publication, a weekly magazine called Shipping Digest, but I was in the same office, I had the same email address, and the focus was the same, shipping and international trade. And so it was a very easy transition for me. And my boss gave me great freedom to do whatever I wanted. as long as I stayed within the broad parameters of shipping and trade. So, for example, I wondered about the baseballs. I was pretty sure that the baseballs used in Major League Baseball were imported, and I thought, this could make a good trade story with a shipping angle. So I called a PR person from a shipping line that specialized in the Caribbean and Central America, and I said, Jennifer, do you by any chance know if you carry baseballs for Major League Baseball? She said, I think I do. Let me check and I'll call you back. And 15 minutes later, she said, yes, we do. They're made at a Rawlings plant in Costa Rica, and we carry them to the ports of Jacksonville and some Gulfport, Mississippi. And then they're distributed to all the major league teams. So, I mean, I had a story, so I had the freedom to do a story like that. And another story on one time, there was a TV show back in the early 2000s called Desperate Housewives. And one time I was at a conference, Transatlantic Maritime Conference, and the top logistics guy for IKEA, the Swedish furniture maker, was talking about the shortage of space on container ships from coming in from Europe and how this was creating all sorts of problems. And he began his presentation with a slide of the Desperate Housewives. And he said, we're so desperate for space that we're sleeping around. And I nearly fell out of my chair. This was manna from heaven. So I put, my art director found a photo of the Desperate Housewives. So we used that in the story. So I went to a little off base, but I tried to bring a sense of humor into covering rather dry technical subjects like shipping and international trade. But I had a great career, and in 2009 it ended when the parent company of the Journal of Commerce decided to shut down Shipping Digest and all the other really small publications that it owned. So I became involuntarily semi-retired, but I got a year's severance and I picked up a fair amount of freelancing. So most of it related to shipping and trade. So I was writing about stuff that I knew. But so that's what I did after college. And how did the Jesuit, I think you asked what impact did the Jesuit, yeah, well, a profound influence. And, certainly you've heard the phrase, no doubt, many times, teaching students to be men and women for others. Well, that phrase, one of my high school classmates mentioned that and said, we were taught that. And I said, I don't remember ever hearing that when we were in high school or in college. And so he checked and Googled it, and it was in the head of the Jesuits came up with that phrase in 1977, but it was really the spirit of the times anyway, that especially in the late 60s, an emphasis on social justice was a strong influence on, certainly on me, and caring about others who are less fortunate. My family was not rich. I'm not rich, but I'm fine financially, and I believe in paying it forward. So I contribute generously to St. Peter's, and financially, but also, talking with you and other students, and recent graduates, trying to offer advice and encouragement whenever I can. And I consider myself the busiest retired person I know, and but very happily retired. I was a co-founder and first president of the Journal Square Community Association. We officially started 5 years ago. Our slogan is working together to build a better community, clean, green, and safe. And so I became the first president, served for about a little over 2 years. And when we were drawing up the bylaws, I insisted 2-year term for a maximum of 2 1-year terms for anyone as president, because I didn't want to be president for life the way I am with my condo association. I've been president for life practically, but it's a really good group, and it's expanded in ways that I never ever anticipated. And most of our board now is young people in their 30s and early 40s, and our new president, the person who replaced me as president, was a young guy in his early 30s, and he's now running for city council from Ward C, as is another of our board members, another young guy. And I wish they weren't running against each other. Either one of them would be a vast improvement over the guy we have now as our council person. But after Kevin stepped down as president, our new president is a young or youngish Black woman, which is really good, because our association, Jersey City is the most diverse city in the United States, and Journal Square is the most diverse area in Jersey City, and I'm acutely aware of it. The founders, well, we did have one Hispanic woman, but otherwise all whites in our 50s and 60s. I'm now 71, but now it's young people and a very diverse group. And we have at least 2 gay people on our board as well. So and we have a history committee. The chair of our history committee, he knows Professor Johnson quite well, James Divler. James has a PhD in American Studies from NYU, and he will be writing a booklet this year on the history of Bergen Square. Are you familiar with Bergen Square? It's the area on Bergen Avenue, centered on Bergen Avenue and Academy Street, which was the site of the first Dutch settlement, permanent Dutch settlement in what is now the state of New Jersey, dating back to 1660. So we applied for and received a grant from Hudson County Cultural Affairs to support the writing of this brochure. And so little did I know that when we were creating this committee that it would focus on things like history. And we also have I now am secretary and also chair of our Green Committee, which focuses on parks, trees, and environmental sustainability. We have a construction and planning committee, and developers, when they are submitting proposals, come to us for new projects in Journal Square. And of course, we always ask them, are you going to have any affordable housing in these projects? And because they are not currently required, they don't, which is absolutely infuriating to all of us. And so our construction and planning committee has a new affordable housing subcommittee, and we have a meeting tomorrow night where we are going to be discussing these recommendations, which we will present to the city and our council person, to mandate that all new buildings have to have a certain percentage of affordable housing, because we're delighted to see Jersey City and Journal Square changing and becoming a more vibrant area, new restaurants, new buildings. But there's a big downside to gentrification. Poor and working class, even middle class people are being pushed out. They can't afford $2,000 a month rents for a 1-bedroom apartment. So, social justice is a big part of it. And we're also I'm very proud we are, and I take credit for this, we're the only community association in the city that belongs to Jersey City Together, which focuses on social justice issues such as tenant rights, criminal justice reform, and full funding for the public schools. And Eric Seckel from Campus Ministry is involved in Jersey City Together, and Professor D'Souza from accounting, she co-chairs the education committee of Jersey City Together, and she's very outspoken about it, but she's great. And I'm proud of St. Peter's to have people like Eric and Professor D'Souza being actively involved in Jersey City Together. So that's some of what how the Jesuit emphasis on men and women for others and cura personalis, the care for the whole person, have influenced me.
And do you think St. Peter's is an important institution of higher learning?
Yes.
If so, why?
Absolutely. And it's important precisely because of people like you, and I don't know where you were born, but if maybe you were born here, but I presume your parents were probably immigrants. It's always been a school for immigrants and the children of immigrants, and St. Peter's, more than any other Jesuit college or university, it has by far the most diverse student body, and it's really serving a very special population. And I'm extremely proud of students like you and so many others, and that I've had the pleasure of getting to know over the last 10 years. And some of probably most of you would have gone to another college or university, maybe NJCU or Seton Hall or wherever. But I'm glad that you came to St. Peter's, and I know that it's been very tough during the past year because of the shutdown. And I feel bad for your class. And I drafted a letter on behalf of the class of 71 to the class of 21, and I expressed that sentiment. But we're sorry that you didn't get to experience the pleasure of just being with your classmates, your professors, other people from campus during this year. Oh my gosh, my buzzer is ringing. Hang on a second. I'll be right back. I'm back. That was my super and one of his friends. My super is a good friend, and I asked him, I have a couple issues in my kitchen, but I think we're almost done.
Yes, that was actually my final question for you. We went over time, so thank you so much for sticking to the interview.
I enjoyed it immensely. And feel free to call me. I emailed you this morning and gave you my number. You can call me anytime or email me, if there's anything you want to check. So will you be writing something up on this? If you want to send it to me to double check, I'll be happy to do it, but don't feel obliged.
So I think the way it works is that the university or maybe faculty will be the ones editing everything. So the students are actually just doing the interviews, as far as I know. For now, I'm not sure if we'll be involved in the actual putting together of the project.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, wonderful talking to you. Do you live in Jersey City, and are you ever around campus? I'd love to get together with you for a cup of coffee or whatever.
Oh, thank you. I actually do not live in Jersey City, but I do live in Hudson County, so the commute isn't that bad. And I will actually be on campus this Friday for an MSA event that's happening on campus. And also on May 11th, the MSA is also planning another in-person event in collaboration with DEI, the Students for Peace and Justice, and the Black Action Committee. And to honor George Floyd, we're going to hold a vigil. If you can make it to that, that would also be great.
Well, I'm going to be away. My partner's daughter is getting married this Friday, so I'll be away, sure, and then I'll be with my partner at her daughter's place next week. But if you're around some other time, let me know, and I'd be delighted to sit with you in person. But
Definitely. Thank you so much for that generous offer. I really appreciate that. You have a lot of knowledge to share, and I would love to sit down with you.
yeah, sure. Okay. Well, and good luck to you. And at Seton Hall Law School, there's a professor I know there. She's a specialist in Asia, Professor Margaret Lewis, Lewis. So if you run into her, you might mention my name. I'm a member of a group called the National Committee on U.S.-China Relations, which has a lot of seminars. It's based in New York. She's very well respected as an expert, particularly on Taiwan. She's written a lot on Taiwan, and since I lived there for 3 years, Taiwan is now a robust democracy. So I'm interested in her work. But anyway, I hope to see you in person someday.
Yes, definitely. Even though I'm graduating, I will definitely still try to be as involved as I can, hopefully like you someday.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, take care. Wonderful talking with you. I enjoyed it immensely.
Bye. Thank you, Bill.
Okay. Bye, Janine.